you're not going to succeed as a coach. You're not going to win because you have a better philosophy or a better system than the next guy. Okay, you're going to win primarily, and we all know this, you're going to win primarily because of your talent. And then you're going to win because, secondly, in my mind, you get buy-in from your players in terms of what you're doing. So I think when you're coaching, I had an assistant coach who a lot of you guys know. I had him for years. He's been at this a long time, Brendan Malone, and he used to walk by me in practice. For 7 years that he worked with me, there wasn't a single practice where he didn't at some point in the practice walk by me and remind me to coach the why. And so it's always got to be bringing back what you're teaching on the floor to your philosophy. Hey, this is why we're doing this, because it helps guys in understanding. To me, especially when we're talking about the defensive end of the floor, this is where Milwaukee, who's the number one defense in the league for the last 2 years, is ahead of everybody. Like, I personally like their system, so I'm biased to that a little bit in terms of the way they play. But I also believe any system will work if guys believe in it, execute it, and stick with it. Where I think the Bucks are the best is getting that buy-in. So they're number one in the league defensively. And I think most of us know they give up the most threes in the league. So a lot of people have said, both in the media and other coaches, a lot of people have said, oh, this league's all about threes now. And the analytics have brought on more threes and everything else. And yet the number one defensive team in the league, 2 straight years, gives up the most threes in the league, okay? But they give up the fewest points in the paint. They are number 5 in free throw attempts allowed, and they're the number 1 defensive rebounding team in the league. So you have to make a lot of threes to beat them. And the thing, again, I'm going back to my point, that impresses me about the Bucks as opposed to a lot of teams, and even a lot of teams I coach. So I'm not being critical of coaches. It's more the buy-in the Bucks have gotten, is that if you come down and say in the first 5 minutes of the game, hit 5 threes, right? Normally what you'll see with defenses is now, even if a team says our priority is to protect the paint, when that other team hits 5 threes, they start spreading out more and gaps open up to drive the ball. That doesn't happen with Milwaukee. Their players are going to stick to what they do. I broadcast their game at Toronto this year, one of the most impressive games I saw all year. They were playing on a back-to-back in Toronto, who was really rolling at the time. It was in early February. And they went in, and sure enough, Toronto opens up the game just knocking down threes all over the place. And the announcer I was working with, who's great, Ian Eagle, said, Milwaukee's going to have to get out on the threes. And I said, look, I've seen a lot of Milwaukee games. They're not going to change the way they play. And if Toronto's going to win this game, they're going to have to keep making these threes all game long, because Milwaukee will continue to make it extremely difficult to score in the paint or at the rim. They're not going to foul you, and they're not going to give second shots. And sure enough, Milwaukee stayed with their defense, and over the course of time, Toronto started missing, and Milwaukee ended up winning the game going away. And so it's not that Milwaukee's unbeatable. They've been beaten. But go back and check, if you want, now up to the last 3 they lost, and Giannis missed a couple of them. So I didn't go back and update these numbers. But up until that point, to beat the games that they had lost, their opponents had averaged making like over 17 threes a game at like 38 or 39%. That's what you have to do to beat them. How many times is that going to happen? Okay? And they stick with it. So my point right now, at least, is not on their system being better, because your system might be that we're going to take away threes. Well, are your guys going to stick with it when you've given up a couple of dunks because you're staying home on the perimeter? My point here is you want to be great defensively or offensively for that matter. Will your players stay the course? Will your players stay the course when things are going wrong? And then the third thing, the reason you're going to win, talent number one, buy-in and consistency number two, and then number three is obviously the teaching of your philosophies and your system, okay? It always comes back to the basics. You know, I had a guy I worked with for a number of years, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know Bob Byer. I worked with him 5 years in Orlando, well, 1 year in Wisconsin in college, 5 years in Orlando, 4 years in Detroit. And, you know, I'd sit around in coaches' meetings, and if we were struggling, you know, I'd want to change things. I'd come in and I'd be talking about, well, how are we going to guard pick and rolls? Do we need to change this all the time? And Bob would say, hey, we gave up 16 fast break points last night and 13 offensive rebounds. How about if we run back and block people out? You know, would always bring it back to the basics of the game. And I'm not saying you should never change what you're doing, but 90% of the time, it is going to come back to the basics and to your teaching and your repetition and holding guys accountable and everything else. And you just got to remember, I think in coaching, it's not the smartest guys who are going to be the best coaches, okay? It's not about what you know. It's about what you can get players to do consistently. That's what it comes down to. So it's not, I mean, it's great. We can sit and talk about schemes and sets and all of those things, and I love that. And I think that's great. You certainly want to be good with those things, but it's not like you're going to outdo somebody else, like you've got a set that is unguardable. I've been asked in the past, you know, what's the toughest thing to guard in the NBA? And I always say the same thing, players. I mean, because I haven't seen a set that is hard to guard that if the players aren't any good. Like if you run a pick and roll and one of the two guys in there isn't very good, you know, either the big guy can't shoot if he pops or he can't catch on a roll and make something go on, or the guard can't shoot the ball so you can go under all the time. Okay, I can guard that pick and roll. I'll come up with a scheme on that and I'll be a genius. That's not hard to come up with. You know, but then when you start putting great guard with great big guy, all of a sudden that's hard to guard. So it's not your schemes, it's not your sets, it's not that stuff that's going to win. It's what you can get guys to do. Ryan, do you have something? Oh, you just popped up on my screen. Okay. So I want to start with, you know, and this is stuff, especially you guys who are all younger and were raised on this stuff more than I was, know this stuff better. But I want to start with at least what I think are important analytically right now. So if we could design, to me, the perfect defense, all right, we would turn you over a lot, okay? We would force a lot of turnovers because obviously that's no points for you, no shots, okay? And in the case of live ball turnovers, we're probably going to create better opportunities to score at the other end, okay? And then I would want to take away the most efficient shots. In order, obviously, the most efficient shot in the game is free throws. And so, you know, you look, and in the league this year, the average shooting free throws was 77%. So every time I send somebody to the line to shoot 2 free throws, 1.54 points. Okay? The next is layups, and we all look at that a little bit differently. I'm looking at everything inside of 3 feet as a layup. So that's going to be shot at right now this year at 66.6%. So about 1.33 points per possession. And then threes, which were shot at 35.7 on the year on average, 1.07 points. So if I can turn you over a lot, and if I can limit all 3 of those kind of shots to a good degree, and then defensive rebounding, which to me, analytically is pretty easy to think about, the extra opportunities alone, if I'm going to give you 2 shots every time down the floor to shoot the ball, that's going to be a very efficient possession. Plus, on the second shot, think of the shots that are created off of offensive rebounds, right? Putbacks right at the rim. We already talked about how efficient layups are. If you go back and look at the stats on it, and I couldn't find mine today, but I've had them in the past, there's going to be a lot of fouls off of offensive rebounds. Free throws, the most efficient shot. And then a ton of threes because people are in scrambled situations. So the ideal defense would force a lot of turnovers, limit free throws, layups, and threes, okay, and take away second shots. Now, here's the problem. Those things don't all work in concert. If I'm spread out on the perimeter, denying everything, trying to force turnovers, or playing like the Bulls did this year where they blitzed every pick and roll, forced over 18 turnovers a game, which is phenomenal, okay? And I thought for them, I thought Jim did a great job with that because he didn't have much inside to begin with, and he needed to change their culture in terms of getting them to play harder. So that was great. It also allowed them, because they were spread out, to defend the 3 fairly well, and they got, demolished in the paint and fouled a lot. I mean, we're all going to go through that. We go back to Milwaukee. So Milwaukee's going to take away the paint. They're not going to foul. They're packed in. They're not going to foul basically because the ball doesn't get into the paint, and that's where a lot of fouls are. And they're going to rebound the ball really well. Well, that's going to open stuff up at the 3-point line. So we're talking about those being the 5 main stats. But the key point, I think, is this. You can't take away everything, all right? You can't. But you've got to take away something, okay? To me, the teams that really struggle defensively are the ones that basically aren't taking away very much at all, okay? You've got to me anyway, you've got to prioritize something. And so if you look at the best defensive teams in the league, okay, first of all, it's really interesting in this time where everybody talks about, it's become an offensive league and offense has overtaken defense in the league. The teams with the 5 best records right now, when we stopped playing, the teams with the 5 best records in the league also happen to be the 5 best defensive teams in terms of defensive rating, okay? And then the 2 best offensive teams in the league, Dallas and Houston, if we went to the playoffs today, wouldn't even have a home court. So I'm not saying that defense is more important than offense. I think you've got to be good at both ends of the court. But this idea that defense has a diminished importance in our league right now, not only it's not about just my opinion is that's not true, the numbers won't back that up, okay? So again, if you look at the best teams in the league, we talked about Milwaukee. Toronto, right? They were the 2nd best defensive team in the league. They give up a lot of threes, and they don't rebound the ball very well at all. Again, it's hard to take away everything, okay? But they get back on defense, so they take away a lot of layups and threes that way. They get back, they force turnovers, and they give up the second fewest paint points in the league, which, by the way, is a tough combination that they have, to be able to be, I think, second in the league in turnovers forced, in opponents' turnover percentage, and give up the second fewest paint points. That's pretty tough to do, but they've accomplished it. The Lakers don't have a lot of weaknesses defensively, right? They force a lot of turnovers. They limit paint points. They even limit threes. What their weakness is, they don't get back. They give up the second most fast break points in the league. Boston's not in the top 10 in the league in free throw attempts or defensive rebounding, but they limit paint points, they limit threes, and they force turnovers. And the Clippers, and I know we've got guys on there, they don't force turnovers, and you guys foul a lot, okay? But you really limit paint points. And if we're really being honest, I think the main thing with the Clipper defense is they've rarely even had their team together, especially what I would look at as their three best defenders with Leonard, George, and Beverly. They've rarely had those guys together, and yet they're still in the top 5 defensively. So I think there's 2 important questions in terms of defensive philosophy for all of you guys, okay? Number 1 is, what do you think is most important to take away from your opponents? What will be the most important for you, your team, to have a chance to win at the defensive end of the floor? That's the first question. And then I think the second question, and it obviously goes along with it, but what can you take away? In other words, if I thought the most important thing for me to take away to, let's say, beat the LA Clippers in a series was, I've got to take away Kawhi Leonard's pull-ups off the dribble. Well, good effing luck on that, okay? You're not taking that away unless you're just going to come and double him all the time on the perimeter. So I think it's not only what's most important to take away, but what can you take away, okay? To me, the easy ones that will not easy, nothing's easy in this game. The easiest ones to take away with emphasis and with work that will give you a big head start before you get to any schemes or anything else are get back. I think you can take that away. Protect the paint. Don't foul. And block out and rebound, okay? There were 2 teams in the league when we stopped that are in the top 10 in the league in all of those things. Fast break points allowed, paint points allowed, free throw attempts allowed, and defensive rebounding. Orlando and Utah were in the top 10 in all of those things. And I think Orlando at the time was 10th defensively, and Utah's like 11th. So good, not great, not elite defenses, but not going to be easy to play against. And so that was an extremely long lead up to where my philosophy is. But I think the lead up is more important in a lot of ways than where I come down in terms of my philosophy defensively, because I think you guys, your assistants, a lot of you getting ready for head coaching job in the future, okay? I think you've got to be determining this stuff. And what's important is not just sitting down and trying to come up with, but what are the questions that you've got to answer to get yourself to your philosophy? It's not just skipping steps to trying to come up with a philosophy. It's all these things. What do you think's important? What can you take away? The whole thing. So for us, for me, and I've tweaked these a little over the last 2 years of unemployment and being able to watch, other teams and everything else. It's still basically what I've always believed. Like I said, philosophy doesn't change a whole lot. System might, but I have tweaked it a little. But we had 7 defensive musts. I'd really think ideally, I would love to get it down to 3, 4, 5. It would certainly be more concise and explainable to players. I just can't get away from the importance of any of these 7 things. I think they're all critical to playing the kind of defense that I want to play. Okay, so the first one I've already talked about. I think you've got to get back. We've got to get back and limit points in transition. Okay. Now again, and I want to make these points as we go along. These things influence a lot. Your philosophy is going to influence your system and how you decide to play the game. So for me, we didn't put much emphasis, in fact, probably put negative emphasis on going to the offensive board. Okay, we wanted to be back. We would get our 1s and 2s back on the release of the shot. Our 3 could only go to the board from the weak side below the free throw line. 5 would go all the time. 4 could go all the time, except we never had anybody go from above the free throw line because, if you high pick and roll and replace, or pick and pop, and the guard penetrates deep and shoots the ball, and the big crashes from the top, it's awfully tough to get anybody back. And so we weren't going to get very many offensive rebounds. Now, I'll say 2 things about that. 2 caveats in terms of the offensive rebounding. One, I coached 2 of the best offensive rebounders in the last 25 years with Dwight Howard and Andre Drummond. So even putting no emphasis on offensive rebounding, except with our 5 men, we were still going to get some. Okay. And the second caveat I'll give you, that's something going to the offensive boards is something that I'm sort of rethinking in this time off and trying to figure out, are there ways we could attack the offensive boards more and get some second opportunities, and not give up things on the defensive end of the floor in transition. So that's something that I've been looking at. And I've seen some of it with Toronto this year. They're able to get a decent attack on the offensive boards, and they don't give up fast break points. And I think the main thing that Nick, not the main thing because they do a lot of things well, but in this regard, one of the things that I think Nick has done a really good job of is they sprint the floor in both directions. It sounds funny to say that, but the biggest thing in terms of getting back is don't throw the damn ball away, all right? But the second thing, if you want to get back, is run hard, sprint back. And there aren't very many sprinters left in this league right now. And Toronto's guys, they go to the boards and then they sprint back. I've heard it from time to time, and even this year a couple of times, I've heard people say, as a coach, you can't coach effort. And I'm like, damn, that's the most important thing you do, coach. Like, if you're not a coach in effort, particularly in today's NBA, I mean, good luck, all right? Because I don't think there's that many guys playing extremely hard on their own initiative. I just don't. Like, you're going to have to hold guys accountable to that. So getting back, really, really important. Again, the biggest thing with that is don't throw the ball away, okay? That is probably, to me, maybe the biggest key to winning, period, is don't turn the ball over, but we could get into more specifics on that. I think it's more detailed than that simple statement, but it is important. And then run back hard. And then there's a lot of other things. And again, if we get to the end and guys have questions, want to go into more detail, we can. So number 1, get back. Number 2, protect the paint. I think, I said it earlier. I'm a little biased toward Mike's system in Milwaukee because I happen to believe in that. That protecting the paint in terms of your half court after you've gotten back, I think it's the most important thing. And I don't think you need a lot of shot blocking to do it. And as a matter of fact, I think ideally the ball never even gets to your bigs. You know, you're stopping the ball out on the perimeter and making it fan out. And I think it's huge because if you go back and you chart where you're giving up free throws, it is usually, you know, one of your big ones. Transition's a big one. Offensive rebounds are a big one. And the ball being driven, obviously, is a big one. You foul. Well, I'm not going to foul as much on drives if I have this trust with my teammates that if I get beat, we're going to stop the ball at all costs behind. And I mean, look, for Milwaukee, they give up about 3, I think, and again, I didn't check this one today. Last time I checked, they gave up about 3.5 fewer points in the paint than the second best team in the league in points in the paint. They are totally committed to it. They are giving up like 38 points a game in the paint, okay? And so part of that, again, and this is how your philosophy relates to your system, they are going to drop their bigs on a lot of pick and rolls. Now, you say, so what? We do that too. Well, what I see around the league is, yes, most people are doing that as their primary defense with their 5s. They're doing it with their 3s, with their 4s. They don't switch a whole lot, and they're dropping, and guys are flaring back. They're in drops and downs on the side, even with their 3s and 4s, okay? And sometimes with their 2s, you know, with Wes Matthews, because they don't want to switch, and they want to have somebody between the ball and the basket all the time. And they're trying hard not to let the roll man behind them because that's layups. So they're as committed to that as anybody in the league. And I think it's a big one, protecting the paint. You know, if you look at it on the other side, right? If you look at it on the other side of the thing, I was talking briefly to Coach Miller when we came on, and obviously New York got a lot better in the time he was there. And a lot of it was incremental improvement across, just as I look at the numbers, but my eyeballs would tell me the same. Incremental improvement in a lot of different areas, better in almost every area. But the one that jumps out that was huge was their points in the paint. So when he took over, they were last in the league in points in the paint at 39.9, so at 40. In the time he was there, they were third in the league in points in the paint, 53 a game. I just think, like at both ends of the court, what's being lost a little bit in this whole three-point explosion, this revolution of threes, is how important the paint is at both ends of the floor. Look, everybody says, well, we're into the analytics. And I look at it sometimes and I'm like, these guys are full of shit. Like, they're talking about we're into the analytics, but I see offensive and defensive systems that are designed primarily to get threes and stop threes, and that's the third most efficient shot in the game. So if I really am into the analytics offensively, I'm saying, how do I get more free throws and layups? And defensively, I'm saying, how do we stop free throws and layups? Then we'll get to the threes. Okay, so I think the paint is huge. That's my point. And again, I hope nobody is thinking that I'm acting like I have all the answers. I'm sitting here unemployed. Okay, I've been fired twice. I certainly don't have all the answers. I think there's a lot of ways to do things. I'm just giving you my philosophy. And so if I sound adamant about it, it's because I've developed it over 40 years almost now in coaching, because I'm old as shit. And so I do believe in this stuff, but I hope I'm not sounding like I've got all the answers. But that's where I am. Protect the paint, number 2. And then the third one is, look, while I prioritize taking away the paint, we can't just give people threes in today's game. So our third must is close and contest, okay? I'll always take away the 3 as the priority until we get late in the game, okay? But I'm not designing my system around limiting 3s. I'm going to design my system based on my philosophy of we're going to protect the paint. Then we're going to try to take away 3s, okay? And we're going to do that by closing hard. And when we're closing out on guys, especially shooters, to run them off the 3, what we're telling guys, because now it's hard, because if you're in protecting the paint, like I wanted my teams to do, what I see out of Milwaukee and some other teams, when you're really in packing the paint, you're in some long closeout situations. I think you've got to tell your guys they're packing the paint. When that ball goes out to the perimeter to a shooter, it's their job to take away the 3. We can help you on a drive. We will help you on a drive because we're committed to protecting the paint. We'll pull everybody to the ball on the closeout. But we can't help you on the 3. We can't help you on the 3. So you've got to close on that. Okay? So close and contest number 3. All right? Now, those sort of go in order. Get back, protect the paint, close and contest. Now, other things that I think are real musts defensively, communicate consistently. To me, and there may be people that disagree, and it may be different now. I don't know, haven't watched him as closely with the Nets. But in my time as a head coach, the best defensive communicator I saw on other teams was DeAndre Jordan. I thought he was an elite level defensive communicator, and I think that really helps. And look, for NBA defenses, you want everybody to communicate, but the real important one is your 5-man. Okay, he's put in so many pick and rolls and handoffs. Number 1, his guy's doing a large part of the screening. He's back in position where he can see out on the floor. Okay, so he can see things. I think you're in real problems if that guy is not a great communicator. The best one I had, Dwight Howard, pretty good communicator. But the best one, Aaron Baines in Phoenix now, an elite communicator. Okay, and to me, communication is 3 things: early, loud, and repeatedly. So we want to communicate early, loudly, and repeatedly. So, if we're going to down the ball on the side and he sees it coming, it's got to be down, 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 so that we know what's going on. Okay, I also think when you're designing a system, just as an aside, I think it's really important that all your talk are 1-word clues, 1 word. That's what you're saying. Like, I don't want to be talking screen left, screen right, okay? Number 1, I think it takes too long, especially if you're going to, say it repeatedly, and I think things get misunderstood. But that's just me. 1 word on all of your schemes. So the 4th thing is communicate consistently. The 5th thing is pressure the ball. And I think as offenses have gotten better and have sort of gotten a little bit of an advantage in our game, particularly in the fact that, you're not allowed to put hands on anybody, especially cutters and things like that. It's really tough to defend cuts. Like, when I came in the league in the mid-90s and was working for Pat Riley, like the way you defended cuts, like our scheme, in fact, on a lot of cuts, cross screens, flex screens, things like that, our scheme was war. That's what we called it, war. We're going to war that over the top, which just basically means we're going to beat the shit out of you, and you have absolutely no chance of getting the ball on this cut because we're going to hold, grab, everything else. We can't do that anymore. And so defending cuts, for example, is just one example. We know what it's like defending drives, but defending cuts are really, really hard. And then more people are in 5-out situations, so it's a little bit harder to track cuts with outside defenders. So you need great pressure on the ball to disrupt passes and take some of those things away. I also think it's harder, obviously, to defend on pick and rolls. I mean, when I came in the league, and even, this went on for a long time. The first thing we would tell guys on pick and rolls is when you got the call up into the guy, forearm on him, and you were going to push him out and ride over the top. Well, that's foul. So we've made it almost impossible to get over picks. So I think one of the things is you put more pressure on the ball, like at half court, and number one, that to me makes it easier to go under because now it's not as easy for the screener to set a screen. He's got to come out further. I can get under, but it just makes it tougher for the ball handler to maneuver into the screen. So I think pressure the ball is a big one. That's the fifth one there. And then the one to me that is the hardest one in a way because you're given two conflicting messages is we want to be physical without fouling. And so I used to just say defend without fouling. The problem is we don't want to foul. We talked about it. It's the most efficient shot in the game. The other problem with fouls are foul trouble ends up you sitting your best guys down. And I think one of the ways lesser talented teams gain an edge is if they get to play their best guys against your second best guys because your best guys are better than theirs. But if your guys are sitting down on foul trouble, it's tough. The problem with a real emphasis on not fouling is you also don't want your guys to be really soft defensively. I mean, you want to have a toughness about you. You want to have an edge to you. So how do you do both? It's not easy, but I think what you have to talk about are the fouls that are acceptable to you, ones you'll tolerate, as opposed to the ones that you won't. So if a guy gets a block out foul, blocking somebody out, ref calls a foul, I'll take that. Guy's trying to take a charge and it's called a block, I'll take that. That's not one you're going to get upset about. It's still a foul. The guy beats me by half a step on the drive. Our defense is to have help behind us, but then I just stop and reach down on the guy and foul. That's a dumbass foul. And by the way, it's a dumbass foul on the first possession of the game, even though you take the ball out on the side, because it's getting that guy closer to foul trouble, and it's also getting them closer to being in the penalty. So, we don't want dumb fouls. When I worked in Miami, Bob McAdoo was one of the other assistants, and he had one on fouling that has stuck with me from 25 years ago. And he used to tell our big guys, a big guy should never get a foul below his shoulders. So your fouls are going to be, we're talking about centers primarily. Your fouls are going to be going to block a shot. Your foul might be going over somebody's back on a rebound, but you're not going to try to strip down. Like he would always say, don't play like you're 6 feet. You're 7 feet. Like play like a 7-footer. If you're going to get fouls, get them up. And so whatever your rules are, I think you need to be clear on what's tolerable, what's not, okay? So, but you want to be physical without fouling. It is a dichotomy, and it's hard, okay? And then the last one, I'm sure you've figured it out already because we've mentioned it 2 or 3 times, is block out and rebound, okay? And for us, it was enough of an emphasis that we didn't run out, And so as much as, like, if I went through my offensive philosophy with you, my second thing is push the pace. And I did want to, but we never had a ton of fast break points, okay? Because we weren't getting that deep outlet like Mike D'Antoni was getting to Steve Nash, okay? Things like that, because we had everybody in to rebound the ball, okay? Now, Frank Vogel, who's I think, an outstanding defensive coach, he had back-to-back years in Indiana where they led the league in defense. Obviously, right now, they're the 3rd best defense in the league in LA. But he's tweaked a little bit. He never did this before, but they run out on every jump shot now. Like, they run out and get those long passes. He's got guys that can throw the pass, and the best guy in the league to throw the pass, and he feels like they can rebound enough. Now, they haven't been an elite level defensive rebounding team like his teams were in Indiana, but he still feels like they're good enough, and it creates them easy buckets at the other end. But for me, and by the way, that's something, again, from watching his teams this year, is sort of like offensive rebounding. That's something that I'm thinking about and trying to watch more of. Would it be worth running out in certain situations? The one now, and it may not be everybody, okay? The one that is most effective for them running out is when it's Anthony Davis running out. And you've all seen it. I mean, LeBron makes that last long pass to Anthony Davis, even if you're back. So you're back with one of your guards. He just throws the ball up, and he's such a great passer that the ball's on target, and he's catching the ball against your 6'3" guy and either dunking it or getting fouled. So again, if you go back to the start for me, I said it's your philosophy and your personnel that determine your system. Well, Frank's philosophy is certainly heavy on rebounding the ball, but his personnel is also the best passer in the game, and Anthony Davis running out to the other end who can catch everything and finish. So you marry his philosophy with his personnel, and you come up with their system, okay? I'll give you one last example, and then, I'm pretty well done other than questions, or you guys can get into a discussion. But this is what I mean by your philosophy determining your system, okay? I'm not as big on switching as most people in the NBA are, okay? And here's the thing. This is why. I'll go back to my philosophy. It makes it tougher to protect the paint, okay? And by the numbers, and I've given you enough numbers today, but by the numbers, that will hold up in terms of the teams who switched the most and where they are points in the paint and stuff. It makes it tougher to protect the paint. Why? You've got a lot of mismatches, both inside and on the perimeter, big guys getting broken down off of the dribble. My number one priority once I'm into the half-court defense is to protect the paint. So switching, to me, doesn't fit with that. If you go back to last year in the regular season, Milwaukee switched less than anybody in the league, okay? Protected the paint the best, switched the least, okay? Second thing is the switching teams tend to foul a little bit more for the same reason. You're in mismatches. Mismatches tend to lead to a few more fouls, okay? And I don't want to foul. That's the most efficient shot in the game. So it doesn't fit with my philosophy to be switching a lot. And then it's tough on rebounding. And I thought, there's a lot of examples of that. Some teams are able to overcome that, okay? But I thought the most dramatic example, even before, the injuries totally decimated Golden State last year in the finals, is Serge Ibaka just rocked Golden State on switches on the offensive boards. I mean, he just rolled down and rocked them on the glass, okay? So because it's tough on rebounding. So it doesn't fit with my philosophy. And that's why with me, I would basically only switch same size. And not only same size, but guys that we thought could, in the switch, both defend the bigger guy, whatever you're saying, even though they're same size, defend the guy inside and on the boards, and the guy we're switching on to the guard or to the ball handler can play the ball. Okay? So now if your philosophy is you think it's most important or extremely important to take away threes, well, then you're going to switch more because it's clearly better in terms of limiting threes to be switching a lot. And so this is what I'm talking about. You first have to decide what you think is important in building a great defense. And then that will determine what your system is. Now, it will also be influenced, like we said, by your talent. Like, I mean, if I'm one of these teams who's 6'7" across the board, okay, probably makes sense to switch a lot. If my 5-man can really move his feet and defend on the perimeter, okay, it probably makes some sense to switch some of that. I probably still wouldn't because I don't know how we're rebounding when my best rebounder at 23 feet 9 on the perimeter. I mean, but it would make more sense. And so it's always going to be philosophy plus your talent leading to your system. Okay, but philosophy is first, and I would encourage you guys, all of you, to have down very clearly what your philosophy is. I also think, by the way, that that's an important thing. Offensive philosophy, defensive philosophy, and your general philosophy of coaching is a very important thing to be clear on and have down on paper when you go in for interviews and things. I think that's something, you don't want to be in there winging it in an interview in terms of what you believe is your philosophy, and then you're just throwing out a lot of stuff that's all over the place. I think this is where, building your system, building your team, building your coaching style, all of that starts is, deciding what your philosophy of the game is. So that's it for me. If you guys have any questions or, on anything else, I mean, it doesn't have to be on the defensive philosophy, wherever you want to go. If you want my coronavirus philosophy, I could give you that too.
Hey, Stan, Adam Harrington with the Brooklyn Nets. I have one question. First, I want to say thank you. As a young coach, can't thank you enough. That stuff was amazing. I definitely took more notes now in 45 minutes than I did in 3 years at Auburn University. So I appreciate it. Number 3, you talked about taking away threes, close them hard, kind of your long closeouts. I'd love to hear your philosophy on that type of closeout. I know you kind of said by any means necessary, take away that 3, but was there a technique or a way, like, I'm kind of personally against the flyby. I think it takes you out of the play. It takes you out of even a split second later on the closeout kind of scramble thing. Look at some teams like Toronto and them that are very good. Obviously, Norman Powell is going to get back into play before Joe Harris with us quicker than with the Nets. But was there a type of kind of technique that you said, hey, take them off, and then you were able to get back in the play in a scramble situation? Or what is your closeout like?
Our basic closeout, Adam, was to try to sprint basically all the way and break down when we get there. And we did it by chopping our steps. That's our basic closeout. But I do think when you've got and there's more and more of them now, when I've got to close on Joe Harris. Well, if I'm a long way away, I'm not even worried about the breakdown as much. I'm worried about running him off. Now, I agree with you, though, on the flyby because, it used to be, going back, right, if we ran at you, we could run you off the three because you would put the ball on the floor and either pull up and shoot the pull up or you'd take it to the rim. Now the shooters don't do any of that. You run by, they escape dribble and make the three. But I would say even that, and I actually don't have the numbers on that, though you worked for Kenny, so you sure as hell do have the numbers because there's nobody who's designed, in my mind, a better approach at both ends of the floor to his offense and defense, to the analytics of the game. I mean, I think Kenny's a great coach anyway, but in terms of, like, you look at the shots you guys got and what you prevent, like, he's an analyst's dream. Like, everything you guys are trying to do makes perfect sense, which to me, I all you needed was better players, better players who could execute it. But anyway, so I don't have this number, but you would. But my guess would still be Joe Harris's percentage on a spot up catch and shoot three is still going to be better than his escape dribble three. And I mean, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I'd be willing to bet on it. If I were in Vegas, I'd put the numbers down that nobody's going to shoot it as well off the escape. I'd rather not fly by. And Rex and Charles know we did occasionally in drills work on flyby, come back into play, but we didn't work on it enough. And I can't think of one time we actually did it in a game. So it was one of those, that would be, if I said that's what we worked on, that would be one of those bullshit clinic things where, yeah, hey, we work on it. No, we didn't. We didn't emphasize it enough. And eventually I just stopped doing it. I mean, you've only got so much time and so many things. We did introduce it. But we did, at a shooter, we weren't even worried about the breakdown. We're just coming at you all the way. I think ideally you get there, you're in front of the guy, you don't leave your feet.
Hey, Coach, it's Casey Owens with New Mexico State. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your time with us. I had a question. I want to see what your thoughts were on zone. As we saw Miami playing a ton of it this year, Washington playing a ton. When I was with the Lakers, we actually brought in Don Casey and tried to implement some of his stuff. It kind of ended up going back to what you said at the beginning of this about buy-in. I don't know if we bought in as a staff. I don't know if we bought in as a team. So we abandoned it pretty quickly. But I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on, 3-2 versus 2-3, where you think it's headed as far as defending these three balls and protecting the paint.
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a lot more of it this year. And very few teams, I would say, who didn't use it at all. I mean, and I've come to the point, and I never played it. I mean, never. And we did put one in, and we did work on it a little bit, like in training camp, mainly because I wanted to have something in to work against when we played teams, but we never used it. And I have come to think over these past 2 years that it's an absolute necessity as part of your system, if nothing else, to just change the pace of things, okay? The other thing, I'll be honest, when you get fired, when you fail, like we did in Detroit, I think you do a lot of self-examination on things you would do differently. And one of the things that I felt personnel-wise is when I had Boban Marjanovic, I should have played him more, okay? The guy's the most efficient offensive player in the history of the NBA. I mean, think about that. We've played for a long time in this league. The most efficient player in the history of the NBA, and I didn't play him. Now, the only thing that makes me feel a little bit better about that is Pop didn't play him, Doc didn't play him, Brett didn't play him. and Rick doesn't play him. So I feel a little bit better. But I still feel like we could have used him more, but everybody would play him off the floor, with shooting fives. Had we played 2-3 zone, I wouldn't play 3-2 with him because I don't want him going to the corner. But had we played some 2-3 zone, I could have played him at least a little bit more if I had done it. So I think you've got to have it. And one of the reasons is, to change pace. But another reason is I might be able to use some of my better offensive players, at least for a period of time, that in straight man-to-man might get attacked at the other end of the floor. I can hide them a little bit. The other thing I'll say is I think that it's really interesting. There's a guy here locally. I'm in Orlando, and there's a guy here, Division II coach, who's had a lot of success over the years at Rollins College, Tom Klusman. He's been there like 40 years. And actually, when I was a Division II coach in the 80s, some of you guys weren't even alive then, but it was a good time. We came down and played his team, and they were straight man-to-man all the time. Well, now they don't play any man-to-man. He has 3 zones they play, and that's all they play. Actually, I think this year he did play a little, but he went about 6 or 7 years and didn't play any man-to-man. And when I was having lunch with him one time, he was asking about zone in the NBA, and he said, here's what I don't understand. Even the teams that use it in your league, and this would certainly be true of me, it's not true of all your guys' teams, but at least until very recently, what you would see in the NBA is we might throw the zone out there coming out of a timeout or something. But if you hit a 3, we're out of it. And Tom would say to me, but if you're in man-to-man and somebody hits a 3, you don't get out of it. You just want them to execute better. And my brother and I have talked, over the years several times about, I wonder what would happen if somebody did what Tom Klusman's doing in the NBA and just said, you know what, we're playing 48 minutes of zone every single night. I mean, if you remember back when Alvin Gentry was in Phoenix, they made a good playoff run playing primarily zone, and now they weren't winning because their defense was great, but it was, he thought, and I think he's right, it was better than what he would have had man-to-man wise. So, look, I think there's a lot of things to weigh in terms of how much you do it, but I think you've got to have it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You've got to have something else to go to.
Appreciate it.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Coach,
Hey,
Sam?
Sam,
Go ahead,
Moon,
Sam.
with the Iowa Wolves. Looking back on this season, in the G League, you have a 4 or 5 day training camp. I probably look back and evaluate myself and felt that we did a lot of teaching and the competition level defensively wasn't there. And just any suggestions you have on getting your guys to compete in such a short window of time, when you only have, a short training camp.
Yeah, that's really difficult. And the only thing that, we went through it a little bit in the lockout in 11-12, at the start of that year, but we still had more than 5 days. And then you go through it in summer league. That's really all we have. And so, my assistant, Bob Byer, always ran our summer league team. And I thought he did a great job in that short window. And you obviously can't get everything in, and you can't even get all your teaching in. So he really focused, which I agree with, on getting our system in, offensively and defensively. How we're going to play in transition on misses and turnovers, how we're going to play on makes, putting some sets in on dead ball, getting our spacing when the ball goes to the post and on pick and rolls and things like that. Defensively, getting in your pick and roll coverages, things like that. No real work at all on individual defense. No work at all in that time on individual offensive skill stuff. You know, you just got to get down to what gets you up and playing as quick as you can. And I know Charles and Rex are on here, and they were on those things, you know, in those camps. And so Bob had them up playing full 5-on-5 on day 2. You know, they were going up and down, full court, and the whole thing. So it was, you know, we've all heard the teaching methodology, whole part whole, which I think is great, but you don't have time even for that in a 5-day camp. You've just got whole. Like, this is what we're going to do. They've got to understand it. You put things in and you go from there. Now, within that, and he's a great experienced coach. He'd been a Division I head coach. I've known him for a long time. He, you know, is a name that nobody knows. He's one of the best coaches I've been around, and I've been around some really good ones. My brother and Pat Riley and, you know, a lot of really good people. But Bob's as good as anyone. So he was still very detailed. Like, you're putting in a set, the spacing's got to be perfect. Like, he wasn't just putting them in and running them through it. But it was totally focused on the whole, and he got them up and going really, really quickly. And look, I think the quicker you get them up going 5-on-5, the better off you are for a lot of reasons, okay? Number one, you know, anybody in camp wants to have energy and enthusiasm. Playing is going to get that going quicker than anything. Number two, that's the only way to truly condition is to play. Like, you can, you know, we got these strength and conditioning coaches now. I could do a whole hour on that, on what's going on in the league with all that. And we got our sports scientists. And by the way, on sports scientists, I'm bad on tangents. Just let me give you one, right? So for a while there, everybody in the NBA had to hire a sports scientist, right? And they were all from Australia. Okay, or the vast majority of them for Australia, because they have these great places where they study. So you had to have an Australian sports scientist. And then at the same time, probably because of the sports scientist, everybody started practicing less, not doing walkthroughs, you know, sleep becoming a, you know, we got the sports scientists and we're doing what they tell us, right? So I've got Aaron Baines, and he's getting ready to play in the Olympics in 2016. So I said to Luke Longley, who was our assistant coach, because Luke used to go around and visit those guys. So I asked Luke, I said, hey, give me your guys' practice schedule for the Olympics. They were going 2-a-days for a month. And so I said to Aaron Baines, I said, does the Australian national team not have an Australian sports scientist? Like, to tell you guys you can't do anything? I think they're hoodwinking the rest of us. Like, their guys know the way to go is to build capacity, but they come over here and tell us not to do anything. But anyway, that's an aside. But the conditioning is the best when you're up and playing. And then the other thing it allows you to do is evaluate your team. Like, you can't evaluate individual players, and you also can't evaluate what do you need to work on if you're not seeing guys play. You know, really hard to tell in a drill thing. You know, years ago when I got fired at Wisconsin, that was my first of 3 firings. Dick Bennett came in after me, and I'd known Dick a little bit from when he was at Green Bay. In my mind, he's the best college coach I've ever seen. And so I sort of swallowed my pride in that moment, and Dick had come into Madison. I was still living in Madison, and I went up and spent some time with him. And one of the best things he said that has stuck with me is, you know, as far as like planning practices and stuff, is watch your team play and they'll tell you what you need to work on. So he didn't have like this list of drills he wanted to do and everything else. It was, I watched my team in the game last night. This is the stuff we need to work on. How do you do that, in a training camp situation if you're not up and playing? So it's hard to do, but I think you can do it. Now, in a normal training camp situation, like in the NBA, we would try, even in 3-on-3, stuff like that you're allowed to do in September, we would get enough in the last week before camp. We played on day one every year. And we brought referees in and would play 3 or 4 quarters on day one. I just think it's really, really important to being up and playing, and then you can go back and, fine tune things as you go along. So I would say just focus on the whole, get in. Like for my first practice, I would think about, okay, what are the things I've got to get in to be able to play tonight? Let's say you're doing a 2-a-day. What do I got to get in to play tonight? Well, I'm going to need at least 1 out of bounds play underneath, 1 on the side, right? And then I'm going to need 2 or 3 sets, and they're going to need to know how we're playing on misses and how we're playing on makes. I would run through all that in the morning, and I'd go through my basic pick and roll defense. I'd come in that night and we'd be playing. And then you can start into your teaching drill work and stuff like that. But the more you play, the better off. One of the things that's happened to me over my career, and it's evolved sort of gradually, but certainly in my NBA career, it's happened. I do, even over the course of the season, but a lot less breakdown stuff and a lot more playing. Now, that's 4-on-4 also, because I like defense 4-on-4. I think it makes it harder on the defense. But I want more live stuff than drill work. I just think it's more important. Now, I know we're not allowed to do live stuff, after the second day of training camp anymore. But, if I had my way, we would still do some live work.
Coach, this is Matt Kingsley at Yale University. So as you talked about the defense, we developed a defense that I saw a lot of similarities to what you're describing with the 5 points. And we run a lot of ball screens, and as do our opponents run a lot of ball screens. And I thought it was really effective versus all that kind of stuff that you see out of your opponent. But as offenses evolved and they start to counter, the drop coverage, we started to get beat on a lot of off the ball screening actions. Do you see that, and did you have any adjustments or philosophy on how to kind of start to defend that stuff a little bit better?
So you're talking about pick and roll with action off the ball?
Either 5 out, like pin down and flare with the ball at the top of the key. Probably more of that.
Yeah, well, so I think, first of all, on that, I think a lot of it depends on who the opposing 5-man is, okay? I thought we played some of that when I was at Detroit, and every team in the NBA plays it now. It's required to play that offense. You're not allowed to not have that in. And so if the 5 can't shoot the ball in particular, then to me, the team that was hardest to play against, and even as I watch it as a broadcaster, was the hardest to play against, was what Kenny Atkinson did in Brooklyn. And he just drops his 5. I mean, I'm not talking about when his 5 has the ball. I'm talking about he drops his 5, like all the time. And so then what that allows him to do is when you're pinning down, they're jumping on top of you and sending you baseline, not allowing you to come for the handoff, right? And you're not getting the back cut because his 5-man's down in the lane. I thought it was really disruptive. And I talked to one other NBA coach about playing against that this year, and really good coach. And he said, yeah, we don't even try to to run that stuff against them. We just play everything in the middle of the floor where they can't keep us from coming off. Now, obviously, if the 5-man can shoot the ball, it's a whole lot different. You know, if that 5-man can step back and shoot it, and their 5-man's got to get up, you know, it's a lot different. With us, we were different. So we tried to put more pressure on the 5 up high, and on all those pin downs and stuff, our thing was no back cuts between the man and the basket. Again, that goes back to we're trying to take away layups first, push everybody to the ball, and then we ran what we called open on handoffs, which depending on who the guard was, it was go over or under on the handoff, and 5 could be back on a drop, or on shooters we might have him up. But you know, but we were pushing everything to the ball. So it was a little bit different. But I like what Kenny did and would definitely do that if I came back against non-shooting 5-men.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Hey, Coach, thank you again for this information today. You kept mentioning and talking about turnovers. We get so focused on keeping our guys offensively free and loose and playing with the pass and sharing it that I think sometimes we lose sight of they're throwing it all over the place. And it gets hard to figure out when is the right time to step in and start coaching these turnovers. I would love to hear your teaching methods of, is it more film work? Is it a one-on-one film session? Is it a team session? Are you coaching every turnover there is? Also wanted to introduce myself, Charles Lee with the Milwaukee Bucks, and thank you for the defensive plugs today for the Bucks.
Yeah, well, hard not to plug you guys defensively. Look, on the turnovers, I would say the first thing is I just explode at practice a lot. But no, I've honestly, I believe this. I think there's two things in trying to cut turnovers. My brother, when he started in the league with the Knicks, he would do both, be at practices at times, and was also doing a lot of their advanced scouting. So he'd be on the road. And when he was on the road scouting, he would try to get in early and go watch a college practice somewhere, you know, to learn. So he was actually coming to Milwaukee and scouting the Bucks one night. So he went up to Wisconsin Green Bay when Dick Bennett was there. And Dick Bennett's teams were always nationwide in the top 10 in fewest turnovers. And so Jeff watches practice, and after practice, you know, he gets a few minutes to talk to Coach Bennett, and he said, "Coach, you know, what do you do to limit turnovers?" And he said, "Jeff, that's simple. Don't play the guys who turn the ball over." You know, and that sounds funny, but it really did affect my thinking. Now, I don't totally believe that, okay? But here's what I do believe when you're determining playing time and things. You've got to decide as a coach, who can turn the ball over on your team? Like, who are you okay with turning the ball over? And to me, it's your shot creators. So like Giannis is going to turn the ball over some. He's got the ball in his hands every possession, and you need him to create shots. So he's going to take some chances trying to make passes. Defenses are going to come at him. He's going to turn the ball over some. That's not going to kill you, okay? But if you're Kyle Korver, you can't turn the ball over. Your job is to shoot it, or if you're not open, throw it to the next guy. That's it. Like, we don't want you going and trying to make a play. That's not your job. So you shouldn't turn it over. When I first started coaching in Miami, when I first became the head coach, Dwayne Wade was actually, his rookie year he came in, and we had Caron Butler and Eddie Jones, right? And so, you know, you're trying to get your best players on the floor. So we started Dwayne at the point, which I think really helped him as his career went on, but he wasn't a point guard. He hadn't played the point in high school. He hadn't played the point in college. You know, we played him at the point in summer league, and we started him during the year. And so he had a great year and a great first 2 years, but he turned the ball over a lot. And I remember being in the playoffs and, the broadcasters would come in before the game in the playoffs and, we would get Hubie would come in. And so before the game, I love Hubie. And he would come in with all the numbers. And Dwayne led the league in turnovers, okay, his rookie year, maybe even his second year. And Hubie would say, Stan, what are you going to do about Dwayne's turnovers? What are you going to do? And I said, Coach, I got to be honest. I'm not worried about it. Like, we were 4th or 5th in the league in fewest turnovers, okay? Because he was the only guy who turned the ball over. So, yeah, he had a lot of turnovers, but we didn't. And so I've always thought this. Your best 2 or 3 guys that have to create shots, okay, they're going to turn the ball over some. Your complementary guys can't be great complementary guys if they turn the ball over. Like, I had Reddick at the first part of his career, and, I trusted him and came to trust him a lot more over the 5 years I had him. And a big part of it is the guy never made mistakes. Obviously, he could shoot, but he didn't turn the ball over and he didn't make defensive mistakes. To me, that's your complementary guy. So I would say the biggest thing is make sure that your guys that you're not even relying on to create shots are not turning the ball over. See, to me, you've got your best guys, and then the guys who play with them aren't necessarily your 4th, 5th, 6th best players. They're the guys who help your top 2 or 3 guys to play well, okay? And that may be 2 different things. And then the second thing, sort of like I said with the fouls, I think you sort of have to decide as a coach what turnovers you can live with and which ones can't you live with, okay? Can you live with an illegal screen if the guy at least was trying to be fundamental? Can you live with that? Probably, right? Can you live with Giannis, your best player, your shot creator, trying to make a backdoor pass and it's, an inch beyond his reach and it goes out of bounds? Yeah, you can live with that, okay? Can you live with Hito Turkoglu, who I had in Orlando, trying to throw a lob to Dwight Howard once a game from 65 feet away and throwing it off the backboard and looking at me and going, my bad, as if I didn't already know? No, I had trouble with that, okay? We try to cut that one out. So you've got to try to decide, what's okay and what's not. All turnovers are not created equal. And then I think, and I should have done more of this. I'd like to tell you, this is what I did as a coach. I didn't do enough of this. I think we did more of it my last year or 2 in Detroit, again, because of Bob Byer's influence. But even in things like, dummy offense, you're going 5-on-0. You just got to really be on the fundamentals. 2-hand passes, 2-hand catches, passes being on time and on target, footwork being right so you don't travel, building habits that will cut into turnovers, because I totally agree with you. As much as you want to cut turnovers, you certainly don't want guys playing tentative or afraid or anything like that. And I also think a big part of guys playing with confidence, by the way, is you being really clear on what your expectations are for them. I mean, you don't want guys out there hesitating, not knowing what's going on. I mean, you got to be clear. If there's things you don't want guys doing, you got to tell them. I mean, I just don't think you can live with everybody trying to do whatever it is they want to do. I mean, because not all players are created equal. I mean, I've watched your games, and I don't want to go out on a limb here, but DJ Wilson is not as good as Giannis. So allowing them to do the same things on the floor, to me, doesn't make sense. So, I mean, those are just some of my thoughts on turnovers.
No, that's great info. Thank you.
Hey, Coach, this is Sean Fine with the Long Island Nets. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. Just had a question regarding, I know, one of your 7 defensive musts, the first one is get back. Transition defense is a huge part of the game. And obviously, if you can limit the points in transition, you're doing a good job. But what is the principles that you have that, when you talk about transition defense, obviously sprinting back, but what is the communication going forward after that?
Okay, I'm going to give you just a couple things, not real complicated. Again, I think being clear on what the rules are, whether it's where guys are on the floor or positions or whatever. So with us, it was 1 and 2 or back. And now when we say our timing on that is on the release. So guys up in the air and the ball's released, those guys should be reacting back. And I don't care if the point guard's down deep in the paint, drove the ball. Even if he shoots it, after he shoots it, we don't want him shortcutting his shot, but boom, he's turning and running. The 2-man is always back on the release. On the release of the shot, they're reacting back. The 3-man has a choice, and he can go, if he's below the free throw line on the weak side, okay? But he's got to have a chance to get it. Here's the biggest rule, and I should have probably done this when I was going through it. Everybody should have this rule. Like, I wouldn't say this about very many things in the game, that everybody should have it. But this rule will go with whatever your rules are. When the shot goes up, when I shoot the ball, there's only 2 things anybody on our team can be doing that will help our team. Either getting back or going to the glass. If you break down your film, and I'm not just saying you, I'm talking any team. I honestly don't think that you could emphasize getting back any more than we did. And it would be the same thing if I watch my teams on film. When the shot goes up, you'll have at least 2 guys who stand right there and watch the ball. They're not getting back. They're not going to the board. So they're going to be late on the reaction, and they're not helping you on the glass. That gets you killed. So I think if you could ever, and this goes back to coaching effort and everything, if you could ever just get it to the point of, if you had no other rule other than you're either to the glass hard or sprinting back on the release, you'd be a lot better. So that's the 3-man's choice to me. And then 4 and 5 are on the glass, but not if they're above the free throw line. Like we said earlier, we're not above the free throw line, because I think point guard penetrates, say 4-man pops on a pick and pop, or even if you're spread on a pick and roll, if the guy up above the free throw line goes to the glass, now you have all 5 offensive players below the free throw line extended, like you're screwed on a run out, okay? So they couldn't go from there. Then it was sprint back, point, talk, and match up. And so it's really not hard if you're back, those first 2 guys, because if I'm back, I see what's coming at me. And I can not only, identify who's going to have the ball, but those guys in the back now can be pointing and talking to other guys as they sprint back. Okay? You do not have a man. That's something you got to get across to guys early. You cannot be running to your man. And we don't have a man in transition. So we're back on the release, sprint back on the release, point, talk, and match up. And that was pretty much it for us. Now, for us, it was more, that's just something we emphasize. So I don't think there were very many times, late in the year maybe a little bit, but most of the time, even if we're running dummy offense, on the release of the shot, our guys had to get back. And if the 5-man offensive rebound put it back in, because we always finished on a make, he had to sprint to half court. So they all had to be back. And for a while, when we were having trouble with it in Orlando, Charles Klask, who's on this call, or at least he was, used to chart it. And if guys didn't run back on the release, he would chart it. And at the end of practice, they would run sprint. So the one thing I'm pretty confident of it's been 2 years. I don't think guys would necessarily remember a lot of what was important to me. But if you ask anybody who's played for me, you know, what's important to stand defensively, I think all of them would say, oh, shit, get back. Like, you're just yelling it all the time. You're doing it at every damn drill. They hated it, but it was a major, major emphasis. And we didn't have – I've seen people with a lot more rules and everything else. And again, I'll go back to what I said early. I ain't the smartest guy in the world, okay? And I'm not sure that being the smartest guy is always the most important. It's what you can get guys to do. And the one thing that I thought pretty consistently I could get guys to do in the NBA was get back and take away fast break points. It all depends, though, on, you know, how important it is to you. I go back to Dick Bennett again. When I was coaching at Wisconsin, I was only 1 year as a head coach. They loved me there. You know, for the 9 months they kept me, they loved me. And we played Wisconsin Green Bay, and we were a lot better, and we did end up winning. But Dick actually sent 0 to the offensive boards. Like, the ball went up, and they all ran back. And it frustrated – we had Michael Finley at the time. Frustrated the hell out of him because Mike was one of the best open court players in college basketball. Shit, there are 5 guys back every time he went down there, you know, and that's what Dick prioritized in getting it. I don't think there's anything more important in the game than being able to get back.
Now, where do you stand on the big running back and kicking the guard out if the guard's on a mismatch down low? That's
what I would rather have. You know, when I was in Miami, when I came up with Pat, and we would work on this all the time, we would talk about, you know, I'm coming back as the trail big. I've just got to find the open man, right? So, yeah, we're matched up. And you know, we wanted Alonzo Mourning to, like, find the wing on the weak side. Like, I don't care how many times we went over that. And Pat Riley's one of the best coaches in the history of this game with as strong a will as anybody I've been around, which Rex can attest to. You know, it didn't matter what we did in the game. I don't care if Alonzo was 30 seconds behind the play. He's not picking up the trailer. He's not going to the weak side wing. He's a center, an old-fashioned center, and he's running to the rim. That's where he's going every time. And I've never seen a big who won't, you know? So I think just let your big get back to the big, and everybody's got to hold for him and then kick out. I mean, I'm sure there are bigs who could do it, but it's just not a very natural thing for them. And you want them around the basket anyway. You know, I don't really want Alonzo out defending at the three-point line. He's going to get beat off the dribble. He's going to foul somebody. I mean, you know, just get to the rim and we'll hold and kick out for him. Now, the one I didn't like is those guys run to the paint so much, and there's so many shooting fives now that their own guy just trails in for jump shots. I mean, we had 5 men I know, like Vucevic in Orlando, who, like, circled Detroit games on their calendar because they were going to play against Andre, and they knew they could just walk into like 5 wide open trail threes a game because he was going to be at the dotted circle. Okay. And they could just walk in. Now that one I don't like. That's your own guy, for God's sakes. You know, you got to know he's going to shoot trail threes. It's hard for big guys. That's a real difficult thing for true bigs. Now, there may not be any true bigs left in a couple of years, but when you've got one, that's hard. And then the Nets do. I mean, a couple of them. I mean, with Jared and with DeAndre, you know, they're going to have trouble with trail three-point shooters. They just are.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Coach, I had a question for you.
Okay.
The closeout questions. We fouled way too much on the perimeter this year, and constantly we're going back looking at adjustments on the closeouts. A lot of it was how the game's being called, you know, the landing areas and guys kicking out. We, you know, I don't know that we ever settled on anything that we really liked, that we thought was effective. You know, when you're playing James Harden, and then we played Atlanta twice late, and Trae Young's doing it now where he's jumping sideways, and, you know, they're jumping all directions on this. What did you see as you went around the league? If you had to go and teach that right now, how to close out, how to contest a three without fouling, knowing that every team has 3 or 4 guys jumping sideways, kicking their legs out, and maybe 1 out of every 10 gets called an offensive foul?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question, Mike. And I've been spending the last week trying to go back through 2 years worth of notes, clinics I've gone to, games I've watched, and organize everything. And then as I'm typing them up here, I put in red the questions I've got, and closeouts are a big one for me because of what you're talking about, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I mean, the one I like the most, and I see teams doing it, is, you know, they're coming straight at you, but they're really trying to turn their own bodies, the defender, and just side contest. Now, you're right. Guys will jump sideways into guys, but they're almost going by them. You know, I don't really like it for rebounds that come straight back, but I think that's one possibility, particularly on shooters. And then, you know, Jeff and I have talked, my brother, who I know you worked with for a little bit, we've talked maybe on guys who aren't the great shooters, but are pretty good shooters. Maybe you just close and never leave the floor. But you've also can't slide up under them. Like, I think the thing that guys have to, I see this one a lot, and I know you do too. Now, this isn't just on a closeout, but the one that draws a lot of fouls, and obviously with Harden, but with Trae Young also, is the step back. Because what happens is I'm guarding the guy on the drive, and as he steps back, right, you're conditioned to, I'm going to go with him, and I'm going to close the space down. And that's, as I'm sliding forward, I foul all the time. I think, and this may be absolutely crazy, if the guy shoots that step back, I've almost got to let it go. Now, I don't know if I can do that late in the game, but again, and this is something I'm not claiming to have any answer to, because I'm thinking about it like you are when I watch it. But to me, the step back is a foul so many times. I'll tell you one thing offensively that I have put in my notes that I would definitely teach if I came back. You know, everybody's switching so much. If a guard gets a big guy on a switch and he goes step back 3 or step back, shot fake after the dribble, automatic foul. Automatic foul. I mean, I'm going to say 90% of the time, if I've got a center on a switch, doesn't even have to be a 3, and I go step back, shot fake after the dribble, he's going to be coming forward, I jump into him, foul. Every time. Like, I think you have to teach that to your guards. And I guess the other way, you've got to teach those big guys, he steps back, you stay where the hell you are and let him shoot. Because they foul every time. I mean, the way the game has been being officiated now, it's almost like you've got to change your techniques just to keep people off the free throw line, because it's the most efficient shot in the game, and you're going to have to let some things go to keep from fouling. Because I'm with you. On a closeout, I don't know. I do like the jump and sort of wrapping yourself around the guys. Like, I'll see it from certain guys at times. Jaylen Brown does a pretty good job of it with Boston. And he'll get up on that hand and contest, and it's hard because he's going by you. So if you try to jump sideways, he misses you. But man, it's an unnatural action. So it was interesting. Last summer, I did a clinic in Iceland with Ettore Messina, who's, my God, one of the best coaches ever and the best clinician I've ever seen. And you know, he had a line when he started talking about defense, he said he has thought about pick and roll defense every day of his coaching life, like trying to figure out how to guard it. And I'm starting to feel that same way about closeouts. And I'm not even coaching a team now. And every time I watch a game, I'm thinking, how the hell do you teach guys to close and contest right now with all these bullshit fouls they're calling and giving guys 3 shots. It's like, to me, the other question is, how do you go over the top on a pick and roll on a shooter? Like, he's going to stop as you're pursuing him. Your momentum carries you into him. Foul. I mean, these are some of the questions. I've got more questions than I have answers. We all do. You know, I remember my dad saying, when I started coaching, I was 24 years old. I was a Division III head coach. And, you know, at 24, you know everything at 24. I mean, I was a genius at 24. And I remember my dad, who coached for over 40 years, said to me, he said, son, if you think you've got all the answers, it's only because you don't know all the questions. And again, these certain lines stick with me. And that's one of the ones, as you know, Mike, because you've been at it as long as I have, as you go on, you just keep coming up with more questions, not more answers. Yeah. And so how you defend shooters, pick and rolls, closeouts, step backs without fouling right now, man, that's a question I've got every single game I watch. And I don't know for sure, but those are some of the things. I do, on the pick and roll part of it, I do like, again, what Milwaukee does, which seems to me they don't do the old-fashioned, like, trying to fight over the screen. They do more what we would do on a catch and shoot, a lock and trail, and they just get behind you, and they're big down on the drop. And then the thing I think they do a tremendous job of too is they do a great job of contesting from behind or on the side and making that jump shooter uncomfortable. He's shooting leaners instead of pull-ups. But man, on the straight closeout, that's a hard one. If I have a revelation, I will pass it on, but I'm not expecting one.
Yeah, that was a tough way to do it. The officials now are really protecting the shooters, and it even gone to the point where now the guy's jumping sideways, and you know,
that's really tough.
Because we looked at just how you traditionally have taught guys to close out, what their instincts are. You have to go against that. You have to change that. You can't close to the chest. You can't close to a shoulder. You can't, all those things are out now.
Yeah. Hey, and while Coach Miller's on here, just for the other guys that are still on, I want to make the point about, we made the point early on, and I really believe in this, about going back to the basics. And Coach Miller really improved New York's defense in the time he had it. And it wasn't anything that was, at least in my mind, watching them and looking at the numbers, that was some great schematic thing. I never think that's what it is with anybody, right? But in the basic areas, right, they got a lot better. Their defensive rebounding improved tremendously, right, Coach?
It did, yeah.
And what was the other one I had here? Because I wanted to make the point of it. Oh, and they quit giving up fast break points. Their fast break points went down. So they went from, in fast break points, 24th in the league to 8th under Coach. So you do some simple things. Take away the easiest shots in transition. Don't give people 2 chances. All of a sudden, you're better defensively. And his schemes did change, and they did some things better. But I'm saying to you, you can get better with not doing anything schematically better if you just do some of the very, very basic things. And I think, coaches like Coach Miller and I will get called derisively at times old school, but there's some good old school shit too. Like, do some real basic things. It'll help you win games. Like, quit hacking people, block them out, and run back. You know what? We're better defensively.
Yeah, you're right. I agree. And thanks for doing that. That was very good today.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun for me. I'm anxious for your presentation next week.
I don't want to go after you. I'd rather wait.
No, you're on next week. I want to know what you did to make the change, because there's no tougher situation than coming in with no training camp or anything else and trying to blend what was going on and make your changes as you go. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Well, thanks for today.
Yeah.
There's your theme for next week, Mike. There you go.
Well, I didn't want to take control of the theme. I'm just saying I would like to do it. Other guys might want to hear something else. It's not up to me, Brian, but I was impressed with that because I know how hard it is to do.
Anybody else have any questions for Coach before we wrap things up?
And if you've got anything, you can always get my contact info from Brian and just email me or text me. I don't mind talking on the phone, but text me first because I won't answer the phone if I don't know the number. I mean, I think that's like most of us. But Brian can give you my contact if you've got any questions or anything. Just let me know.
Thanks again, Coach. We really appreciate it. Anybody else have anything? All right.
All right, guys.
It's been great. Thanks, Coach.
Okay.
Thanks,
Guys.
Coach.
Thank you.
Have a good evening,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
All right, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, guys. Salam alaikum.
Mahmoud, what's up, boy?
What's happening?
Danielle Marshall.